listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
I'm good. How about you?
Good, man. It's 2021. We're still one of the top IAM podcasts in the world, which that's impressive stuff right there. And these are interesting times in our home country of the United States, wouldn't you say?
I would say so. There's been a little bit of news recently in the U.S. For unfortunate reasons, but this is not a political show, so we will try to steer clear of any potential landmines. IAM is a bipartisan topic. How about that?
I'm still optimistic about 2021, hopefully being better than 2020. I'm hoping to be able to, hit the road again and do a little bit of travel by the end of the year and see and meet many of our listeners out at IAM conferences.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing I think I miss the most is at this point, I'm ready to get back out on the road. Once it's safe, once, vaccinations and stuff like that have reached some sort of, whatever metric is to make it safe for folks. But yeah, I've been home since March. My Google Maps timeline is the saddest thing that I think I've ever seen in my entire life. It's like for the month of December, you only went 5 miles away from your house. So not the most exciting travel things, but it is what it is. I'm sure it'll pick back up. Like I said, I think it'll be towards the end of the year, kind of like what you're thinking, but we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely.
So we're going to learn about a certain organization in the identity space that we've been looking to have on for a while. We probably shift to identity talk because I don't think anyone wants to hear about our vacation and our travel plans, et cetera. So let's talk about women and identity. It's an organization that's been around for a little while. And to help us with that conversation, we've got one of the leaders of the organization. It's Chopard. She's a U.S. ambassador and a variety of other titles, as we've been just talking with her, that she's helping out with from that organization. So welcome to the show, Kay.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you both.
Well, you came highly recommended from a couple of folks that we've had on the past, people like Nishant Kaushik and Ian Glazer, and we're excited to have you on the show. I'm also excited because we may or may not get an audio appearance from Piper the cat. We will see if that happens or not. If we get some comment on identity from Piper, that would be great as well. But in the absence of that, our traditional first question that we always like to start with is, how did you get into the identity space? Is it something that chose you, or did you choose it?
It's a great question. And so it chose me. It was not something I was looking for, and I was doing something so completely different. So I think I have told you before, I'm an attorney by training, and I started out in, doing the traditional practice of law things. And then I moved into, in the nonprofit world, actually, and I was managing national nonprofit memberships, and someone actually in the identity field who I had met in other circumstances recruited me to help create the first sort of nonprofit public-private partnership with NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology. This was back in 2012 when they were working on this National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and they wanted to create a nonprofit and have this sort of public-private partnership where industry, the identity industry, would be working sort of hand in hand with government and to try to accomplish all these different things. And it was a terrific opportunity. And I said, sure. But I have to tell you that the first 6 months, my head hurt like every day because I really had to learn about the IAM field. There was a lot of terms that you all use that I'd never heard of, acronyms. Really, the first 6 months, I thought, what was I thinking, And I was really brought in for my management skills, frankly, and to really help set up the organization and get started. But it turned out to be something that I really loved. And I even tried to go away, right? I got recruited actually to run a different nonprofit back in the legal world. I only stayed there about 3 years. And as soon as I decided to go off on my own, all these identity folks started calling and saying, hey, does this mean you can do projects? And so I've gotten right back into it. And I'm really grateful for that, because I enjoy the people and I enjoy the work. And I think as we're dealing with the pandemic, it's becoming even more important. So it's an exciting place to be.
Okay, I have to say that it comes to mind, you might be the only attorney that I've met within the identity management field. You're certainly the first that we've had on the podcast before. And I think that probably gives you a unique perspective. I'm not sure if that triggers any thoughts that you would have in terms of what is that unique perspective, or is it just kind of the framework and that you're given as a law student to how to approach problems? But what makes it different, do you think, that you bring to this identity field?
Well, I think that a lot of what I bring to it, and I wouldn't attribute anything I learned in law school at all to this, but I think that a lot of what I bring to this is that in many ways I have a practical point of view, but I'm I see the legal policy that is often involved in things that people don't think about. And I'm often a broker, if you will, between people who are using the IAM technology, need it, have to have it. But a lot of times they just want to delegate, and they'll say, I just finished a project with a prosecutor's office and they just wanted their IT people to make decisions. But you can't do that, because how you structure whatever kind of identity, authentication, all these things, there's a policy reason for why you do the things the way you do. And a lot of it is grounded in some very important legal policies and legal principles. And a lot of times people don't understand that. I do a lot of work, for example, in the legal community around digital evidence. And people forget that when you have a surveillance camera at a 7-Eleven and they've captured a drug buy or something in the parking lot, right? Well, the innocent bystanders that are captured by the camera have their own privacy rights, not just the people who are, involved in illegal activity. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that that's not an IT decision, what you do with that, right? So if I'm a mom and my kids are in my minivan eating a slushie and they don't know about this, they don't want their images splashed all over the internet in the name of transparency. So there's a lot of things that people have to think through. That's a very simplistic example, but so I think that that's kind of what I bring to it. I see a lot of the policy implications that I have concern that people don't always pay enough attention to.
Oh, that's a great perspective. So one thing I'd like to maybe shift to is talking about women and identity. One thing I love is that the concept is kind of baked into the name, Women and Identity, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more. What is the organization all about? Maybe tell us a little bit about the history of the organization and kind of the mission.
Well, I certainly think that the leadership, the impetus for this came from women who work in this industry, right? And I think that's happened a few years ago. People were talking about it and they kind of said, why not? So actually, although there's a big US presence, people like me, this actually started as a nonprofit based in the UK. So that's currently where sort of our headquarters, if you will, are. It's 100% volunteer organization. So there's no staff at this point. There's not people who are paid. I'm a volunteer. So I have a day job, but I'm very passionate about women and identity. So I devote time to it. And that's really everyone that's involved. And, the vision for the organization is that identity that's for everyone should be created by everyone, and really pushing that diversity. I mean, we talk obviously about women in particular, but that really expands, to people of color and to people of different sexual preference and gender and, just all these different things. Disabilities, that's another one that we've started to see. Just really saying we need to be more representative in the IAM world, and we haven't done that enough. And now that said, I think the other thing that is really unique and I think sort of special about Women in Identity is that the membership is also very diverse, right? So it's not just women. There are lots of men who belong. And I am amazed at the commitment of some of the men in the organization who really see diversity as critical to how we work, how our companies are organized, our work teams and all that kind of thing, but also the products that are being developed to be really useful to our clients. It's really important that we have that diversity in creating the things that we do. So I don't know, does that offer any?
That's perfect. And I have a follow-up question, if I could, is, like the Identity at the Center podcast, it's a global organization. I kind of say that in a joking way, but 2/3 of our audience is based in the U.S. and a whole 1/3 is outside of the U.S. And one of the things that we have to be really careful is, since Jeff and I both live in the U.S., a lot of our guests are U.S. based, is not making it 100% of a U.S. based focused podcast. And when I think about Women in Identity as a global organization, the question comes to mind that, or the question would be, are the challenges that women face in identity the same around the world, same as the US, or are they facing different challenges based on where in the world they are?
That's a great question. And I don't want to pretend to speak. There's over a dozen countries that are part of Women in Identity, and all of them have an ambassador like me. And I can't speak for all of them, but I will tell you that we host weekly coffee calls on Fridays. And the first coffee call, and I'm the one who hosts those. And the first one is always with folks who are on the other side of the world for where I am. I'm based in Washington, D.C. So like New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, and so on. And what's interesting is we usually talk about certain substantive topics when it comes to really more about the diversity topic and how it relates to identity. And what's interesting is that everything we talk about resonates with those folks as well, right? So, for example, there's a couple women from Singapore who are often on those calls, and we've talked about things like, so for example, we talked about when women speak, often women's voices are not given as much credit or as much weight. And there's a lot of research about that, which I'm happy to share with you. So this is not me just saying, oh, sour grapes, my experience. No, we know a lot about that, and it's very cultural. And many times that even means other women, right, who give less credit to women's voices and their opinions. And when I'm talking with folks in some of these other cultures, that's an example where it really resonated with them. So they felt the same, but their sense was the cultural norms, if you will, that they have to overcome those challenges are at a higher bar than maybe what we experience in the US. So that in that sense, and I can't begin to explain, Japanese culture or any other of those, but it is a different mindset and a different experience. So what I have found so far is that the issues seem to be the same, but sometimes the degree or some of the things that are real barriers for them, have a different place where they are. And I think the same is true in some countries. I actually think that women in leadership are more well accepted than they are in the US or the UK, for example. So, it's, I guess we're not homogenous, even though the issues I think resonate, but sometimes to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the country, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, obviously cultural differences will weigh in on any number of things, but, given the traditional male female roles in those cultures would certainly play out into business, which is identity and all this other stuff too. As far as partnerships with other organizations, I think Women Identity has some level of either overlap or maybe even something more formal than that with organizations like ID Pro. Can you talk a little bit about what that overlap might look like, and how that works from two organizations kind of working together, sort of in the same space, but with a little bit of different focuses?
Sure. Well, I think that's very true. I think ID Pro has been very supportive of women in identity, and women in identity as well. We have a lot of cross membership. I'm a member of ID Pro and of Women in Identity, right? And I think a lot of people are. And so we've done and there's other organizations in Canada. There's DIAC, which I am not going to remember exactly what that stands for, but Joni Brennan runs that organization, and they're doing a lot of really great things. In New Zealand, there's Digital Identity New Zealand, which is also a nonprofit, and we really support each other. So some of it is we have the cross-pollination of some same members, but a lot of it is supporting each other's events, each other's education and outreach, and I think in some ways sort of supporting each other's missions, which is, I also think, really, really important. And I think the other thing is a lot of times you'll be doing something, we're supporting a conference or something, and I'll say to people, hey, have you brought ID Pro in on this? Because it seems like there would be certain areas that they would have expertise or be helpful, blah blah blah, whatever it might be. So I think that's very true. We haven't, I don't know if we have a very formalized relationship at this point, but there's certainly a lot of mutual support and respect. And it makes a big difference.
And that's how I became aware of Women in Identity, was at an Identiverse conference, probably, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I remember seeing, the banners for it. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool, because, traditionally IT, and really as a subset of that, identity has been male dominated, right? You go into these conferences and it's like, ooh, there's a girl, right? And it was kind of like a rarity. And over the last few years, I've definitely noticed a much stronger trend for, more, not only diversity, but inclusion for some of the other folks. And that's where I saw it. And I know there's a lot of overlap between membership. I'm a member of ID Pro. I'm also a member of Women in Identity, right? So, I think that's something that, maybe some people just may not be aware of, who can actually join these, and that there is a place at the table at an organization like Women in Identity for men to help support and, be part of that organization and help extol, the virtues of diversity and inclusion, making sure that identity problems are being looked at holistically and not just from one point of view. And I think a lot of good products, just like identity can be for an organization, follows that same process where, you have diversity of opinions, diversity of use cases. You mentioned not just women, but also, usability concerns, right, that come up out of this stuff like that. So I think it's important that when people who are in charge of identity for their organizations, people that are listening, is that they understand that it is not a one size fits all, and that there are going to be different viewpoints that can contribute to a much stronger product in the identity space, whether that product is their identity program at their organization or an actual software or service, right, that's being developed, those sorts of things. So I always found that really interesting. And I think one of the things that is also helpful as part of this is, the idea of mentoring and getting people out there and helping them be successful. One of the things that I love about the identity space is, people are very, very welcoming to it, right? Whether you've been in the space for, 6 months, or if you've been in it for 15, 20 years, right? I think there are a lot of people who are willing to share their knowledge, and people don't have to necessarily, run the same roads maybe that have been run over before and haven't been as great of experience, right? Be able to learn from that. And one of the things I think would be interesting to hear from you is, what sort of value does mentoring, provide for folks out there, but also being a mentee, right? The opposite of being open to having that sort of, relationship with someone who's maybe got some experience and kind of can take you under their wing and, help shepherd and guide, some of the folks into the space.
That's a great question. I'm trying to think about where do I start? So at the moment, Women in Identity doesn't really have a formal mentoring program, right? But there is a lot of informal mentoring. And I myself have started looking at a lot more research about how to make that happen and the benefits of that. It's sort of interesting. McKinsey and Company did a study that showed for the last 20 years, companies where there was women in leadership, like C-suite level, right? High up leadership, experienced 15 to 20% increased revenues over companies who did not. And yet it has not been enough of a motivator to change the diversity, right? So if money's not driving our interest in this, what does it take? And a lot of the research shows that it goes back to what I said before, sort of, it's systemic, it's cultural. So how do we overcome that? One of the things that we know is that men are more likely to mentor other men and be comfortable with that and sort of do it without hesitating, without thinking. I don't know what the factors are for sure, but men have not always been willing to do that as often for women. And I think it's really important that they be willing to do that, and they be willing to champion them, and say good things about them, even when they're not in the room. And in a lot of ways, I think we have to rely on that men will build up that expertise. So I know I mentioned you before, there's a terrific book called Athena Rising, which was written by two old white guys. And it basically explains why it's important for men to mentor women and how to do that, which in some ways isn't all that different from mentoring men, but sometimes it's a different mindset and a willingness to take that risk. And even you mentioned Identiverse. So this past summer, I spoke about these issues at an Identiverse session, and one of the gentlemen in the chat said, he said, a lot of times when I'm in meetings and women are the ones being interrupted or they don't get as much chance to talk, whatever he said, I try to share my white boy power. And I make sure that they get called on, or I say, hey, you mentioned this. I think that was a good idea. Why don't we let, such and such tell us more, and do those kinds of things. And the wonderful thing about Women in Identity is we all have to come together. And I am so grateful for the men who are willing to do that. That said, I think there are often other challenges that women face, and that sometimes it's easier for women to, help other women. And that's one of the things, certainly as an organization, we're trying to do. And so I've had the opportunity to kind of do some of that informally with women, like we mentioned about in other countries. One woman in particular who I really helped get through a whole career change, to change a different job. And some of that was about the support to say, you don't have to be unhappy, and there are other things out there, and you can, continue in the IAM field. You don't have to leave to go on and do other things. And she's doing terrific, and I'm thrilled for her. So I think it's a real mix, but it really is critical. And in some ways, although identity's been around for a long time, in some ways it feels like a newer field. And maybe it's because there's so much emphasis now, especially with the pandemic, that really, I encourage people who may not have thought about this as a career, that it really, it's a legitimate career choice, and you should make that choice for so many different reasons. So did I answer the question?
No, it was a great answer. And I find it so interesting because we've talked a few times now, and you mentioned that piece about men mentoring women, and it's really something that I've chewed on a lot, and kind of came to the conclusion, yeah, I can kind of feel that, because I think in our society, we're always looking for the ulterior motive. Okay, why is he helping out her? Maybe he likes her. And so as long as that kind of mentality exists, there's the potential that people hold back and are afraid to be, looked at in that way. Does that make sense to you? Or does that resonate with you?
I do think that there are people who have concerns, but I have to tell you, for me personally, in my own career, there's a lot of things. Well, remember when I said I got recruited to go into, I helped start up the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, IDSG, back in the day. That was a man, right? He saw me in other settings. And I'm so grateful that he saw my talent, if you will, my skills, and said, hey, we really need what you bring to the table. And if he hadn't done that, the trajectory of my career would be so different. So I'm very grateful for that. So I do think that there's some of that, but I think it's really, you have to think about how you handle all of that. And there's always going to be bad actors. But I think by and large, there's a lot of people that when you see someone who does a really good job and you like them and you think that they deserve a shot, I think it's terrific. And how close is that relationship? It's not like he and I were best buddies. We weren't. But that said, it was such a jumpstart to my career. And there's a lot of other people like that, or people who influence me about how my philosophy, if you will. And that made a big difference. So, and I'm grateful to a lot of men. I'm also grateful to a lot of women, but I'm very fortunate that way. And I hope that others will take the risk, if you will. As long as you have good motives, as long as you're there to help and support other people, that's really what makes the difference. And I think when you're genuine that way, that's what shows through, right? And so when you say, hey, you should take a look at this person because they're really good for whatever reason, and then that comes to pass, it's like, I don't want to recommend somebody because my professional reputation is on the line unless I think they're really good. And I think when people see that and they're like, oh, wow, you're right, she really knows her stuff. And, that was a good thing. So I know what you're saying. You can feel that risk, but I think in some ways in the field, it's gotten better. I'm not exactly sure why, but
you got to be able to be willing to take some risks like that. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to change. You use the word gratitude. That resonates with me. In terms of gratitude, Women in Identity has been built on the backs of a lot of people. And I was wondering if you maybe wanted to shout out some of those people and talk about the contributions that they've made.
Sure. Well, I'd like to start, and I think I appreciate you giving me the chance to do this. So the original board of directors for the Women in Identity, which, as I mentioned, started in the UK, is actually a mix of UK and US professionals. And I'd really like to shout out to them. Emma Lindley, Colette D'Alessandro, Pam Dingle. Those three women sort of built this. They took something that was talked about and made it real. So I really give them a lot of credit. And Pam recruited me to be part of this. So, I'm thrilled for that too. But along with that, we have some other people that are members and have really made a difference. Like if I could shout out about some of the men who are members, Ian Glazer, who I know that you all know, he's been fantastic. I've made him speak at all kinds of women in identity events, but he's really good at promoting us and working together, which is fantastic. Nishant Kaushik, who I'm probably not saying his name right, but Nishant is on almost every Friday coffee call with me. And I just can't get over his commitment to diversity. It's amazing and it's terrific. He's very thoughtful. And he's just very supportive also. And another man who's been really helpful to me is Andrew Weaver. Andrew is actually in New Zealand. I've learned a lot from their approach to diversity and to a lot of other issues. And he is another one. I had him and Tamara Al-Salim, who's the ambassador to New Zealand. They were on a panel for me at a conference that would have been in DC if we were meeting in person. And And he's the one who spoke up and said, hey, women in identity is wonderful. Everyone on this call should join. So, it's nice when the men are saying this is a worthwhile organization. So I guess those would be the folks. I mean, Helen Chu in Singapore is terrific. I mentioned Tamara, Melissa and Chanda Jackson and Nicole Landry. They're all up in Canada. They're also really helpful to me, as you can imagine. Canada and the US work together, all of the other leadership folks. So it's a great organization, and it can be a lot of work when you're completely sustained by volunteers, and there's no paid staff. So we have to all pitch in and support each other, and we really do that. And like I said, we're all in this together, and you see that in the entire organization and all the work we do. And I think it makes a big difference. And I'm like, as you said, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful.
I was sitting here listening while you were talking about, all these great people that are in the space. And if you haven't heard Ian speak, he was actually on the show previous to this one. So go back and listen to that one if you missed it. But I was sitting here thinking about mentor and mentee and some of the folks that at least that I've come into contact with. And I'll be honest, I'm a terrible mentee. I'm very individual. I kind of like to learn things myself, and, that's just me. But I I don't mind being in that mentorship type role with other folks. And I'm thinking about the times when I've actually been a mentee and didn't even know it. And the most pivotal, that's not even a word, pivotal mentors that I think that I've had at different points in my IAM career were all women. I'm thinking of my first job in the identity space. I was the first man on an all-woman team building Lotus Notes IDs and Rack FIDs. So in the spirit of shout outs, I'm going to shout out Caroline and Kathy, right? They're the ones that really got me into the identity space, showed me the ropes, whether they liked it or not, that's how that worked out. I think of managers that I've had in the past, Maria, who has really kind of kickstarted my career in me taking a more active role in managing my career versus just being a passive bystander. And I think of other really strong women that I've been really, happy to be associated with in previous roles that I've held, people like Tina and Jamie and folks like that who, man or woman, they know their stuff, right? They're great to work with, and their success helped my success. So, I think I went on a little bit of a diatribe there, but, it just got me thinking here as you were talking. It's like, what? Now that I think about it, they've played a very pivotal role in my career itself. And, I'm happy to see, those different viewpoints being more recognized in the space. And, I hope others will, take the opportunity to take a look at their organizations, whether it's up or down from wherever they happen to be sitting, and, take advantage of, the really smart people that are probably already in the organization and listening to those viewpoints. So I appreciate you sparking that into me. And again, shout out to Caroline, Kathy, Maria, Tina, Jamie. You guys know who you are. I don't know if you're listening, but you all had a big impact on my career. So shout out to them.
Your jerker moment.
Well, you've been super gracious with your time, and I want to make sure we respect that. One of the things that we like to talk through also is, how can people get better? As Jim likes to say, how do you sharpen the saw, right? What keeps you on top of your role within the identity space? And it doesn't necessarily have to be identity based itself, right? It can be getting better at any facet of your professional career. You mentioned a book earlier, the Athena Rising book, and we'll have links in our show notes to things that we talk about here, so people can easily reference it. But are there other resources that you think other people should check out to help them, whether it's identity or diversity or women identity specifically?
What I do to kind of sharpen the saw, which is a good way to put it, I'm a little bit more deliberate about when I see webinars or books or articles, about, especially for me, about diversity, whether it's race or gender or disability, whatever it might be. I actually try to be a little bit more proactive and build time in my day to pay attention, to read things, to watch those webinars, even though nobody's paying me to do that. And, that's kind of on my own time. But I think what happens is it makes me better in everything else that I do. So I tend, of late, I have done more around diversity, equity, and inclusion than I have around identity, although I'm at lots of identity conferences and webinars and all that kind of thing. But I think I'm really sharpening the saw there. So I may have mentioned to you before, I signed up here in the US, the Big Ten law schools. I am an alum of one of those Big Ten law schools, which is probably how I heard about it, did a whole series on race and the law, but it's free, and it was not really set up as some kind of, legal education. It really is an introduction about issues. And remember when we talked about early in the podcast, where I feel like a lot of times I'm looking at what are the policy issues, what are the legal implications, but what are the policy issues that come out of identity? And when you start to see, it's just a real awakening for me about areas that I hadn't even thought about. And then I also have my own little reading list, and I read a lot of books that are specific. I mentioned Athena Rising. Another one, when I talked about women's voices, there's a book called The Silent Sex. And it's really about what are those cultural norms we have that we aren't even aware of, that give less credibility to women's voices. And there's all kinds of science and research about so many of these areas, and more than I've touched on here. So that's what I do. I read. I choose to not read the novel, but read the book that's a little more educational. And what I find is that for all of us, in a lot of ways, this is about becoming aware, just sort of paying attention. In Athena Rising, it recommends that when you're working with a group of people, you sort of take a step back and see who gets interrupted, who talks most of the time, whose ideas get taken over by others, and basically it says, and if you watch, you'll see that's all women. Women are the ones that get interrupted. Women are the ones who don't get time to talk. Women are the ones whose ideas get taken over by others. I mean, and these are guys, so I hadn't thought about that. And a lot of times we women, we're doing some of this same thing to ourselves. So I think it's important to just keep educating yourself, to be aware, to read about or watch these webinars and look for, where does this apply in my own life? Because I think that's how we really make change. It's not by a checklist about our hiring procedures or anything else. It's really about what do we take and internalize? How do we grow? And we have to be committed to, I think, our own growth, to sharpening the saw, as you say. And to do that takes a little bit of effort, but I have been amazed at the ways that I feel like I've grown and how my knowledge has expanded, because of the research and the hard work of other people who are willing to share that.
That word awareness, I think that sparks a good thing that I think people really need to take into consideration, right? Being aware of your surroundings and how your actions affect up and down, but also people are watching, right? There's a lot of people who are looking at, different people, whether it's in the organization or whatever it may be, and the way that you conduct yourself has an impact on people that you may not even be aware of. So, take that into account when you're designing your identity programs, when you're running the business, of your identity, whatever it maybe looks like, take that into consideration. So
I just had one thing I would like to say, and it's really something that you said, Jeff, that I think is so important. And that is that you can be a leader no matter what position you are in the company. You don't have to be an executive to be a leader. And I think your comment about other people are watching is very true. And the more that you become aware and you embrace that diversity, that inclusion, you'll be a leader right where you are, even if you're an entry-level person. So I just would encourage people that you don't have to wait till you've been at this for 10 years. You can start right now and people will pay attention. And I think Jeff's right about that. So I appreciate you raising that.
Those are all good stuff. And I will definitely have this listed in the show notes. So the Big Ten series, Athena Rising, The Silent Sex, maybe we'll even get a link to, Kay's big brain list of bibliography books, whatever that looks like. We'll try to include as much of that in the show notes as possible so people can check that out. Kay, before we wrap things up, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Or check out Women in Identity? What's the best way for people to look into that?
Well, I would suggest the Women in Identity website is a really great place to start, and I encourage everyone, whoever you are and whatever position you're in, to sign up. I think it provides a lot of good educational background. It also gives you a really terrific network. And it's it raises awareness, I think, in a lot of ways. You will have to be approved, but that's mostly because we got spammed a lot in the beginning. So we realized we had to do that. But there's always, I mentioned the coffee calls. Once you sign up, I would encourage everyone to join us for the coffee call. It's a half hour, and sometimes, and the topics are all over the place, and you can introduce anything you want to talk about too. So it's a great group. We have 2 calls to accommodate different parts of the globe. There are, for reaching me, I have a profile, and I believe my Women in Identity email is on there. Again, that's my volunteer. I mean, I have a day job and I have a separate email, but for Women in Identity, it's just k@womeninidentity.org. Not hard to find. Women in Identity has a LinkedIn page. It has a Twitter. I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we, so we try to post and put a lot of information out on social media. For example, the coffee calls, always on Twitter, you'll see what time it is, the link to get on, and what the topic is for that particular week. So usually I give them an article for people to, spend 2 minutes to read about the topic. So those are probably the easiest ways to be in touch. And I would love to talk with anyone and answer any questions. And, I just encourage, we're very inclusive and very welcoming. So I'm so glad to hear that both of you have signed up. So,
and Kay, there's no cost to join as well, right?
Oh, that's true. I forgot to thank you for that. You're right. There are no member dues. So it's free. Membership is free. And we mostly rely on things, like paying for our website from corporate sponsors. And you'll see they're listed on our website too. We have quite a few companies that really help us keep the doors open. But you're right. There is no dues. And as I said, it's all volunteer run. So
that's great. So the website is womeninidentity.org, and we'll have a link to that in the show note as well. So, encourage people to not only check it out, but, become a participant, be part of the conversation, and drive up that personal network and communicate and identify with other folks that are in the space. So, Jim, any final words of wisdom before we wrap it up for this week?
First, maybe jokingly, I hope we didn't interrupt you, Kay, as you were speaking. But Jeff, if we did, hopefully we can edit it out. No, my normal thing, which is for all of our listeners, we want to connect, we want to network. You can find Jeff and I on LinkedIn. It sounds like you can connect with Kay on LinkedIn as well. And then Kay, you're in the DC, you're a Beltway person. Maybe if Jeff and I get out to DC, we can all go to a Washington Nationals game, the World Series champions in 2019, right?
Yes.
Kay is overly excited. I can tell from that prospect. Yeah, that would be fantastic. You have to imagine at some point people will be traveling again. So I'm looking forward to fist bumps in the hallways, and putting those fist bumps to virtual faces that I've been seeing over the last year, and hopefully, Kay, the next time we're able to get in touch in the same spot, let's get a coffee, a beverage, whatever it may be, wherever we happen to be, and look forward to that. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and close it out for this week. Want to thank Kay for being part of the show today and sharing her insights. Jim, thank you as always. You can find the show at identityatthecenter.com for those who are listening and want to check out some of our other shows that we've done. And we're also on Twitter as well at IDAC Podcast. And with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it for the week, and we'll talk to you in the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.